lesson number 5 of our process through the Gospel of Luke. We are here at the Prairie Center Church of God of Prophecy in Olathe, Kansas, and we want to talk about Christ challenging conventional thinking. And what is conventional thinking? Well, that's the normal way of thinking. Isn't that interesting when people talk about what's normal? Or in the days of COVID now, we talk about this is the new normal. That's a phrase that they've used over the last couple of years pretty frequently, the new normal. Well, there is as many times as things do change, it's interesting how they stay the same. As you read back through the scriptures, there was a very debilitating disease called leprosy. Remember that? Leprosy? We used to talk a lot about that. That was always something that, as a youngster, that was, they'd talk about people's fingers falling off, and it was gross, and it was interesting but gross at the same time. But you know what people had to do? They had to cover their face, and they had to stay a ways away from people and say, I'm unclean, I'm unclean. Does that sound very familiar? That does. So things aren't really any different now than they were in the time of Jesus. The technology is different. The way we understand things or how rapidly we may learn things has changed. But really, things have not changed. It's still the same type of thing. But Christ is going to challenge some of our ways and the way that we think. And this lesson is going to come to us from Luke chapter 14. And our golden text is from 14 and 23. It says, "The Lord said unto the servant, Go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled." Of course, we'll get to that part of the lesson later, but the whole goal of this, as we'll find in that parable, is to bring people into a relationship with God. And so that's the ultimate result of our lesson today. But Jesus is going to challenge some things that are going on. As we just finished up the Christmas and New Year's holidays, we talked a lot about what we ate. That's always, you go to a gathering, even your other friends, oh, did you have ham or turkey or prime rib? Or people had shrimp. I had one friend that said, they decided they couldn't decide what to have, so they made gourmet hamburgers. And, they said, well, that's a great idea. There's a lot less cleanup and a lot less time prepared. And it was just, we talk about food. When we fellowship together, we talk about food, or we share meals together. That's a big part of our social fabric, okay? And it's not, that's nothing new either, just like we talked about other things not being new. In the times of Christ, and even now, where you sit at a meal is very important. Traditionally, the head of the table, you buy a dining room set, and they have 2 chairs that are different than the rest, aren't they? They have 2 chairs that have armrests on them, and they go at the end of the table. Why? Well, that's traditionally that was for the father and the mother. Those were places of honor because they were tired. They needed to rest their arms. But it was a symbol of respect. The head of the table, or you go to a banquet and there's a head table. There's a table where the dignitaries or the bride and groom sit. Somebody of significance is sitting there. Okay, and that's what we're talking about today, as Jesus was going to have a meal with some religious leaders. Now, we talk a lot about the Pharisees as we go through the scriptures, and the Pharisees were the legal experts of the time. They were the ones that were kind of the morality police. They wanted to make sure everybody was following the Mosaic law properly, and that they were washing when they should wash, and they were fasting when they should fast, and they were resting when they should rest, and all of those types of things. And so this is the way the events were unfolding here in Luke chapter 14, verse 1. It says, "And it came to pass, as he went out into the house," this is talking about Jesus, "as he went out into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day, that they watched him." So not only was he a Pharisee, a legal expert, but he was one of the main ones. He was a leader in their religious society there. Okay, so he had, he would have been financially affluent. He would have been important politically and socially. and even in the religious realm. So he had the whole package. He was important, and he had invited Jesus to his house for a meal on the Sabbath day. And it says, and they, being the other religious Pharisees and the other people that were around there, they were watching Jesus. He had been teaching at the temple. He had been teaching them as he walked along the way. He had been healing people. He had been performing miracles. All of these things had been happening. And even before this time, there were a couple of times when Jesus had performed some healings on the Sabbath day. If you remember the story of the man with the withered hand that he stretched forth, and there was another one that a woman had. She says she was bent over, she was bound, she was bowed, so she had evidently a spinal condition of some sort. And Jesus had healed both of them on the Sabbath, and he was reprimanded for that by the religious leaders because that was work. He wasn't supposed to work on the Sabbath, and Jesus put them in their place, saying, you know what, if your ox or your donkey needs to have water on the Sabbath day, you let it out and let it drink water. Or if it falls, if you have somebody that you love that needs someone, you're going to care for them even if it's on the Sabbath. And that's again, he had already done these things, but once again it was the Sabbath, and they were paying attention. How is Jesus going to respond in this circumstance? Now, I want you to know that if you have, and hopefully your friends and your circle of influence, the people that you're around, know that you're a Christian. Did you know that they're watching you? That every time you make a decision, every time you do something, every time a subject comes up, they're paying attention. They may not say it out loud, but they're paying attention to how you respond in that situation. You know, are you going to be, are you going to join in with their activity? Are you going to condemn them? Or are you going to act this way? Are you going to act this way? What are you going to do? People watch you. Once you have taken a stand for Christ, people are going to notice how you respond. And that's what they were doing to Jesus at this time as well. So they were watching him. How is he going to, what is he going to do? It says, and behold, there was a certain man before him which had the dropsy. And that's the dropsy, the research and the description that they have is that was a like edema, where your body retains moisture and swells up, is one of the terms that may have been used for that. It really doesn't matter what the disease was. There was somebody that had an obvious ailment, okay? And he came, whether he was an invited guest or he just happened to be there, but this man came before Jesus, and the Pharisees, were continuing to watch him. And Jesus spake unto the lawyers and Pharisees. Usually it's them trying to test him, isn't it? You know, they were always asking Jesus questions. He got the drop on them this time. He says, he asked them, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? Well, they had already stated in earlier events that it was not. You know, that they had an issue with it, and Jesus had already spoken to the point where he was going to do it anyway, because it was the loving and the right thing to do in regards to helping someone. And so he asked them, is it right to heal on the Sabbath day? And for once they provided a little wisdom here. It says they held their peace, and he took him, the man that was sick, and healed him and let him go. So Jesus performed a miracle on this man and healed him. Now, why would they say, you know, is it legal to heal on the Sabbath? You know, this man, he had a condition. It was obvious to them, but it wasn't something that was imminent. It was not like he was in immediate danger necessarily. He could have just come back the next day. You know what? He could have just suffered one more day and come back. You know, thinking logically, does that even make sense? If you care for someone and you say, well, I'd really like to help you. You know, I know that rock is pinning your foot to the ground, but I can't lift a rock. It's the Sabbath. I'll be back tomorrow to do that. It doesn't make sense, does it? Jesus said in this circumstance, this man, it's not breaking God's law to perform another part of God's law, which is to love one another and to help one another. It's not breaking that law to help this man on the Sabbath. So he healed him, and he let him go. And then he answered to them, saying, which of you shall have an ass or an ox that's fallen into a pit, and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? You know, he posed that question back to them. If you had one of your animals, you know, you had a donkey or an ox. Now, you have to think about, why would they have those in the first place? Well, those are tools that they would use to make money. That was part of their income. They were farmers, or they were tradesmen. They had to have ox to pull their carts or to pull their plows. They had donkeys to haul their wares around. Okay, if one of those animals falls into a pit, well, that means that animal's going to die. It's really a strange phenomenon. But if a cow or something, a sheep, any of those animals, if they fall into a ditch and they're on their side, their bodies are so heavy it actually compresses their chest cavity, and they're not able to breathe. They will die just being laid upside down in a ditch. Okay, and they're so top heavy, they're like a turtle. They can't get out of those ditches. And so if you don't pull them out of that, they're going to die. So he says, you know, your livelihood, an animal that you depend on and spent money on, is in danger. Even if it's on the Sabbath day, you're going to help that, because it satisfies something for you. He says, but this was nothing for me. This was for somebody else. So why is it different? Why is it one wrong and one is not? And so he kind of put them in their place, and they recognize that in verse 6. It says, and they could not answer him again to these things. He says, they you know, how are you going to argue against that? He had put them in their place and showed their hypocrisy in that circumstance. So the lesson for us is that you know, not that we should be out there breaking God's laws. That's not our goal. But our goal is, when we see somebody in need, we need to help them out. When we see somebody that has a need that God can supply, and is there a need that God can't supply? If somebody needs healing, if somebody needs salvation, if somebody needs financial help, if somebody needs emotional help, God can help in all of those circumstances. But sometimes it requires us to do it. You know what? God could have seen that man with the disease and just healed him without Jesus doing anything. But the way God's plan works is that God has us do something. God has us do some action for it to be the catalyst of that. And I don't understand why. I can't explain that part of it. But God does have us, you know, do some action to do it. And so what he's saying is, do what you need to do to help in those circumstances. Betty. Right. That's right. And I think it'll become evident because these stories are all linked together. You can't take them you can use them independently, but if you put them all together, it makes sense. Where at the end, the goal is that we are at the meal, that the feast that is going to happen at the end of time. Okay, the marriage supper, the fellowship that we have with God is the end result of everything that we're doing. And so if we go back to this beginning part and saying, if I help someone in God's name and through God's power and authority, it's going to reveal God's power. It's going to increase our faith. It's going to help people recognize there is a true God. There is a God that cares, and there are people that are God's people that care for me as well. So all of those are used in cooperation to get us to the end result of recognizing that there is an invitation out there for us to a supper that is going to be unlike anything we've ever had before. That's going to be a fellowship with God at the end time. So that's where we will end up. But let's go on with verse 7 now. It says, and he, Jesus, put forth a parable to those that were bidden, those that had been invited to the Pharisees' house. It says, and when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them this. This was his parable. So choosing the best rooms, or the best places to eat, okay? Again, just like we talked about at a banquet, there's a head table. And in lots of places, you set in accordance to your rank, okay? If you see, let's go to an extreme version that exaggerates that. Let's look at an awards ceremony on television, okay? Where do the best, most popular actors and directors get to sit? Right up front. Okay, and where the lighting is good, and where the crowd can see them. Where do the ones that maybe are the as you watch credits and they're getting awards for ones that are way down on the list, ones that you never see, they're back in the balcony, they're back in the dark, they're at a lower status place. Okay. And so Jesus noticed that that's the way when all of these people that were invited to the Pharisees' house came in, they began to, in their pecking order, jockey for position, who was going to be closest to the host, because the host was the most honorable, and then the ones next to him would be the ones that were next honored. Even you remember the disciples, when he says, when you have your supper or you have your kingdom, I want one of my sons to sit on your left and the other on the right. I want them to be your confidants. I want them to have that place of priority and authority. And Jesus noticed that they were doing that. And here's the parable that he gives them. He says, when thou art bidden to any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee, and he come and say to thee, give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. So, the long story short here, he says, when you go into a place, don't assume your position is higher than the next, okay? He says, if you go in and you take the highest position, and then somebody comes in and says, no, that's not yours. Imagine you're on an airplane and you just kind of elbow your way up to the first class section, and then a flight attendant has to come and say, excuse me, no, you're behind the curtain. You have to go back here and set someplace else. Well, then that's an embarrassing situation, because you're going from a place of honor and prestige to a lower place. And that's what he's saying. Don't do that. He says the way to do that, he says in verse 10, he says, when you go to some place where you're invited, always take the lowest position. Okay? And then if they choose to honor you, you can be moved up. And he says that, and he will come up to you, and he says in verse 10, he says, friend, go up to the higher place. He says, then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. He says, if somebody selects you to go up there, well, then you're being honored. But if you have to be debased and put down, it's going to be affect you just the opposite. And so that's a good, wise thing. It's almost like it's a parable, but it's almost like a proverb for us to work. Now, when do we apply that in our lives? Well, when shouldn't you apply that in your life? Okay, in our simple everyday world, how do we do that? Sometimes it's allowing somebody else to go in front of us in the checkout line at the store. It's maybe allowing somebody else to go ahead of you in traffic. It's waiting in line someplace. You defer yourself to a lower estate and offer them an opportunity to be ahead of you. Now, if they offer you, it's okay to take it. That's a place of honor if somebody gives you that place of honor. But in doing that, we have to remember what we said at the very beginning, that as a believer, people are watching you, and they're going to pay attention to what you do. And if you will sincerely and with love in your heart defer to somebody else, they're going to notice that. But if you say, well, I'm a humble believer, and you're giving people elbow chucks to be first in line, they're going to notice that too, okay? They're going to notice how you interact with the people that are around you and how you respond. And so it's not that we're trying to be hypocritical. It's not that we're trying to do it for show, but we do have to recognize that people are paying attention to how we live our life. And if we live a life according to what Jesus, red letters, remember that's Jesus speaking. He's telling you, don't put yourself forth as a person of priority. Humble yourself, and he's not telling us that we won't be elevated at some point. You know, there are times when good Christian, humble Christian people get promoted, they get elevated, they get honored in some way, and that's okay. But if you do it of your own accord and do it in a proud manner, God's going to find a way to humble you in that circumstance. So, utilizing the opportunity when you are elevated to a place of position, when you are elevated with some accolade, you have an opportunity then to share the good news of God. You can give God credit. You can give God glory for what he's doing, and that will allow you a platform then to do that. So there are ways that God will use us when we become elevated in some way. So don't assume just because you're a believer that you're always going to be last in everything. God will use, and I've said this for years and years, that if you use in your workplace, in your social settings, if you use godly principles, that will automatically elevate you. If you are honest, if you are kind and caring and loving and helpful and all of those things, and even the fact that you will do things, there's a scripture that says when you find something to do it as if you're doing it to God. The work that you do, serve in your job as if you're serving God. Well, how could a employer not promote that? Okay, how could they not give you accolades for that? But when you do that, you don't puff your own chest up and say, well, look what I did. Say, I did this because of what God has done for me. And it gives you, again, an opportunity to bless God in what you're doing. So that's where we want to finish off here. Jesus himself summarized it in this way in verse 11. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Why should I add anything more to what Jesus said? That's very, very good. Verse 12. He continues to give them a lesson. And here we're going to change direction just a little bit. He says in verse 12, he says, and then said he also to him that bade him. So the man, the Pharisee, the chief Pharisee that had invited Jesus there, Jesus says to him, when thou makest a dinner or supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, nor thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. Okay? Lot of wordiness there from Jesus, but what he's saying is, don't just invite people that are going to benefit you. Okay? Why do you, I'm in a position where I do some buying for the company that I have, okay? And companies will invite me out to dinner. Oh, let's go out to dinner, okay? Do they invite me out to dinner because they like me? No. They like what I can do for them, okay? And vice versa. If I have a customer and I invite them out to lunch, is it because I like them? Well, sometimes, but sometimes I wouldn't normally. We have nothing in common otherwise. The only thing in common is that I want them to spend money. Okay? And so don't just invite people or don't associate with people only because of how it benefits you. And that's what he's telling this man. But he says, when you do something, he says in verse 13, call the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. There will be a time. He says, when you have something to offer somebody, offer it to those that have no way of paying you back. Okay? When you're doing something for somebody, do it for somebody that has nothing to offer you in return. You're not going to get paid back. You're not going to get anything from them. Sometimes, what's even worse? Sometimes they don't even appreciate it. Sometimes they don't even say thank you. Well, I'm not, we talk about that. I'm not going to hold the door for that person again. They didn't even give me a courtesy wave or a head nod or anything. They just barged right through. Well, that's not your problem. That's their problem. Okay? You did what God asked you to do. When you do something for someone, Don't do it for the accolades. Don't do it for the payback. Do it for the fact that Jesus himself promised you that if you do something for those that can't do it for themselves, you're going to get rewarded for that in heaven. There's going to be a time when you're going to be rewarded, but it's not always going to be here on earth, and you shouldn't expect it to be. And so that's a good example for us to follow. Again, because people, as we said earlier, people are watching you, and people are watching. Why did they do that? And that's, people are very cynical, and when you do something for somebody, their response is often, "What do you want in return? What, I owe you something now," and your response has to be no. I did it for the love of people because God loved me and gave himself for me. I'm doing this for you because God also loves you and gave himself for you. It's all leading back to the gospel message. Everything that we do, the reason we do everything is all leading back to our acceptance of the gospel and our ability to share that gospel message with other people. That's what it's all about. And that's where he comes up with this last parable that he talks about. In verse 16, it says, "Then he said unto them," Jesus speaking again, red letters, says, "And a certain man made a great supper and invited or bade many to come." Okay? So a great man is going to have this huge supper. And a supper was a thing, it was an event. In many days, a wedding feast or something may last for 7 days. It would be time after time after time of fellowship and eating and revelry and all of these things. And so this man had made a great supper. Okay? And he sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, "Come, for all things are now ready." So he had sent out this invitation earlier. People had evidently responded with, "Oh yeah, I'll be there," and RSVP. Okay? I don't even know what RSVP stands for, but it means I'm either coming or I'm not coming. Okay? Those people says, "I'm coming." Okay? And so on the day of the feast, the master sends out his servant to tell them it's time. Come in. The meal is prepared. Everything is ready for you. And of course, they went to they made lots of excuses. And they, verse 18, and they all with one consent begin to make excuse. The first said unto him, "I have bought a piece of ground, and I must needs go and see it. I pray thee, have me excused." It says, and another said, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray, have me excused." Somebody has some property that they bought. Well, you don't have to go that day. You knew this was coming. You should have been expecting it. You should have scheduled around it. Another one bought not just an ox, but 5 yoke of oxen. So he had to go prove. Well, why did he buy them without proving them in the first place? He should have test drove those ox before he ever bought them. Okay, so that doesn't make sense. These are flimsy excuses. They are just reasons. Why didn't they want to go? Yeah, maybe this, it doesn't matter why they didn't want to go. They were self-absorbed. It was something about me. I have something to do. I have something that's more important to me than going to the supper that you have created, the festival that you have created. And then, of course, another one that says that I have been married, or I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Okay? Schedule your wedding another day. Use this as your own party. I don't care. But no, it was all about me. They're all about me. Me. Okay? And of course, then the master says, go out, because he was very angry. He says, "Go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring hither the poor and the maimed and the halt and the blind." And so the servant did that. And then he says, there's still room. And he says, okay, go out into the byways and the hedges. Go out outside the city, outside of our local area, and bring in as many until the house is full. Okay? Of course, we know this is a symbolic story of the gospel message, that God is the master of the house. He is going to have a great supper. He's going to have this great gathering together at the last days when the just are gathered together. Okay? And he has invited the Jewish people. His Messiah, his son, was sent to the Jews as their Savior. And they rejected him. Those were the ones that were first invited. And they made all kinds of excuses for why they didn't. You know, they developed these religious tenets that they adhere to, but they couldn't see the Messiah and the benefit that he was offering them. And so he says, okay, we're going to go to the others. We're going to go to those of the Jewish community, but those that are the lower in the society, those that are disadvantaged in some way. They're poor, they're sickly, they're weak, they're crippled. All of those that are unable to care for themselves, those are the ones that we're going to go to. And even that, there was still room left. And so he went to the outside. He went to the Gentile nations, those that were not originally, according to Jewish custom, available to that salvation. We know that God's original plan had always intended for it to be all nations. God had always planned. It's not that God changed his mind, but he knew that this was going to happen. And this resulted in what he said here, that all of us are going to be, verse 23 is where he's talking about that. And the Lord said to the servant, go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I said unto you that none of those men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. He says those that had rejected me are not going to be able to participate. So God has a plan for us, but our job, we are the servants. Okay, we are the servants. What did the master tell the servants to do? Go out and find them, bid them to come in, or beg them to come in. Okay, find somebody that needs help and help them. Okay, that's all of these stories are interwoven, you might say. Jesus is just layering and layering and layering. He's saying, okay, I see this one man at this supper that needs help. I'm going to help him. Then it comes to a whole group of people that the servants are now going out and finding other people that are sick, other people that are disadvantaged. And he's saying, I have something to offer them. Bring them in. And we are the servants. We need to seek them out, seek those that are needing God, and bring them into him. So as we are living this gospel life in our own life, again, recognize that people are watching us. People are watching how you live and how you react. And we need to make sure that we are doing it according to the principles that Jesus himself did. That in spite of the conventional norms or the conventional thinking, he did something out of character for the rest of the society. He did something for somebody that needed help on a day when he wasn't supposed to do anything. Okay? He also brought in people that says, that you should start off thinking of yourself humbly, and God will elevate you to a position that he wants you to be. And in the end, we're all going to be invited to that great supper that the Master God has prepared for us. And Jesus is, as he said, preparing a place for us even today for us to be there with him. So go out and compel those that need his help, which is everyone, to come in and participate in that great supper. So God bless you, and have a wonderful day.